I just bought this abandoned car that does not run and I'm going to fix it with only $300. This is a 2010 Ford Taurus 3.5 liter and it's only got 104,000 miles on it. And it won't run because it's got a lot of water in the motor from a common issue with these cars. See, when Ford designed this motor in all their genius, they put the water pump sealed inside the timing cover, which is okay until the water pump goes bad and leaks out all the antifreeze inside the engine and contaminates all the engine oil with water. Now, our water pump and timing kit runs just about $300, and I believe that I can fix this engine with just that, but I will have to do a lot of work to get this engine clean and get it to where it'll run again perfectly. Now, I bought this car from another shop where they were recommending a complete engine replacement for the customer, and that's the reason they left it abandoned. See, most of the time when you have an engine failure like this and it dumps a lot of water inside the oil, it can lead to other things going bad in the engine. So replacing the water pump without hearing the engine running is a complete gamble. And since we have to remove the motor to replace the water pump, it's a good idea to see if we could get this motor to run while it's still in the car to make sure that it's a good running and functioning motor. Now, it's pretty obvious that this motor will probably not run correctly in its current state, so we need to remove the oil pan. I told you. And get this antifreeze/oil mixture of sludge out of it so we could crank this engine over, see if it fires and see if it has any NOx ticks or anything else that's going to cause issues later on down the road. Now, once we start removing the oil pan, we can see how bad this engine actually got. There is way more antifreeze and water inside this engine than I initially thought, which tells me that this water pump was leaking for a while, and the person that was driving it saw the antifreeze level get lower and lower and just kept adding antifreeze, which just kept dumping more and more water into the oil. By the time we got the oil pan off, we can clearly see that this brown sludge is essentially covering everything inside the motor, and looking up into it, I am starting to have my doubts on whether I can fix this motor or not. Now, as my confidence dwindles, I feel like it's a good time to talk about the sponsor of today's video. Today's video is sponsored by BetterHelp. With the new year, it can be difficult to handle the expectations that make dramatic, immediate changes that improve your life, or the expectations that come with just simply fixing a car. So whether you're feeling sad, mad, overwhelmed, or just plain old burnt out, BetterHelp can connect you with a therapist that can talk you through your pain and worries and get you feeling like yourself once again. With a 4.5 rating on Trustpilot and over 7,000 reviews, it's no wonder why so many people have chosen BetterHelp to find the right therapist for them. And even if the first therapist isn't the right one for you, BetterHelp makes it easy to switch therapists at any time at no extra cost. Just simply fill out a questionnaire and BetterHelp will connect you with the therapist in a matter of 48 hours. Click the link in the description below or go to betterhelp.com/Eddie to get 10% off your first month of therapy. I know after this, Ford, I may need to do the same. So after I got off the phone with my therapist, I had enough confidence to go back into this repair, and we started using all the brake clean that I could find in the shop to clean the bottom side of this motor. We even took the valve cover off, assessed the damage from up top, and sprayed some stuff down in there. It was at this point that I realized that I was going to have to do even more to get this motor clean. So we put the oil pan back on, we went down to the gas station and bought a couple gallons of diesel fuel to run through the crankcase while we started this engine. This just feels wrong. See, I'm hoping to kill two birds with one stone. By putting diesel fuel in the crankcase, we could clean all this sludge out of the engine, and by letting the engine run, we could see if we have any rod knocks or anything wrong with this engine, which would make me not want to take it out and try to fix it. Let's see what happens. Now, it seems like we've done a lot of work just to get to this point, and that's because we have, but we still haven't even started the repair. Now that we know that this motor runs good, it has no rod knocks or any ticking going on, we could go ahead and remove it to do the water pump and timing chain. Because the easiest way to do the water pump and the timing chain is to simply remove the motor so you have enough room to do it. Thanks, Ford. We got a project to do now. Let's get this motor out. Now our game plan to get this engine out is pretty simple. We're going to disconnect all the electrical connections for the engine and transmission, all the coolant lines and the cooler lines for the engine and transmission, and essentially drain every fluid out of this powertrain system. And then we're going to remove the bottom subframe, and at that point we're just going to have the engine and powertrain held up by the two upper mounts. Okay, as you'll see now, the whole powertrain will just kind of rock back and forth, and that's because there's no frame to hold it in there, and there's no mounts that hold it from going back and forth. That's the torque mount. That's what that does. It keeps it from rocking back and forth. The only mounts we have holding this thing up there are the two upper mounts holding the transmission and the engine in. Now, there's two obstacles we have to get around to get this thing out. One, I think we'll maybe be able to bring this AC compressor over here and be able to, squeeze it out that way. If not, we'll have to make some more room with the other obstacle, this power steering rack back here, and see if we can get it around the exhaust and maybe maneuver this engine out from around those two obstacles. The only other thing that I have to disconnect is these transmission lines, and luckily Ford makes that easy with these quick disconnects. Now we could put a Harbor Freight table cart underneath this powertrain, essentially set the engine and transmission on it, unbolt the mounts, and then raise the car off of the powertrain system itself. This is a much easier way to do this, especially if you have something like a lift and a Harbor Freight table cart. Now with the engine out of the car, we can start disassembling it and getting it down to the timing cover. And you'll see how much we have to take off this motor and why it's so much easier to do with the motor outside of the car than it is inside the car. And if you were designing a car, you should design it to where you could do this job inside the car, but hey, it's a Ford, so what can you really expect from them? So to get this timing chain off, we gotta lock down both these cams, because if we take the timing chain loose, the cams may rock one way or the other and come out of timing. So really the proper way to do it is to get cam lock tools, but I don't have those, so I went ahead and made my own cam lock tools. And I think I did a pretty good job. They fit right down in there. And this is the first one I cut, so this is my first prototype, and I'm getting ready to cut my second one right here. Hey, when you don't have the tools, sometimes you just gotta make them yourself. So now that I got my tools made and we got the cams locked down, we can go ahead and take the timing chain off and assess the rest of the damage on this motor with this bad water pump. Oh man. So it's not a great sign that we have oil and coolant mixed inside the actual water jackets, but hey, we're this far into it, we might as well keep going and just ignore all the warning signs because we have already. So we push forward and we clean everything off, including the oil pump that we can get to, and we go ahead and put our new timing chain and water pump on. Now getting the timing set right really takes two people. There is timing marks and there is highlighted links on the chain, but to get it right in line, you need somebody to hold the chain and turn the crank back and rotate it into correct timing position. You also need to check top dead center on cylinder 1 to make sure that cylinder is all the way at the top to make sure you are in correct timing position. So now that we got this thing all the way back together, we can talk about what a bad design by Ford this was. And I believe on the later 3.5 liter V6 models, they updated this where the water pump does not leak into the motor through this weep hole right here. But this is the poorest designed water pump setup I've ever seen. I really hope that it didn't do any more damage to the motor, and really you don't know that until you get it back together, you put it back in the car, and you start it up for real. There's several things. You could turn this motor, it could have bad bearings in the crank, you wouldn't be able to know that. It could have a bad head gasket, and you necessarily wouldn't be able to know that because this water pump leaks, and it gives you practically the same symptoms of a blown head gasket. So you have no choice but to either replace the motor when you get to this point or do all this work that I've done here and you're still left with a 50-50 shot on whether you could fix it or not. And with all that in place, we torque everything down, and all we really got to worry about now is if this thing has a blown head gasket from running too hot. And if it does, I'm definitely going to have to get my therapist back on the phone, so I might have to hit up betterhelp.com one more time. Now we got this engine timed up correctly. Now we're going to seal it up and make sure everything is nice and tight where it won't leak, so we can get it back in the car. Now we're gonna drain the oil. As you can see, we still have some pretty nasty oil in the bottom of here. And we're also gonna flush out the coolant system here. We got a hose going to, I believe this would be the upper radiator hose, and then it's flushing all the nasty stuff out of that coolant system that was in there. Regardless of how bad of a design this motor is, we got to put it back together now and make sure it works. So before we put it back in the car and put the timing cover back on this thing, we're going to take the oil pan down one more time just to get all that mud out of the bottom of it. The diesel fuel did a tremendous job cleaning this motor up, but there's still a little bit left down in the bottom of the oil pan. And before I start this vehicle up for real, I want to make sure I get every last drop of this antifreeze oil mix out of here. Now, the easiest way to do this while I have the motor out is to get a cherry picker, lift the motor up, and take the oil pan back down off of it, clean it out, seal it back up, and that way I can silicone the oil pan and timing cover together all at one time. It's not really the ideal way to put this motor back together, but it's what we have to work with when we're dealing with a piece of junk Ford. So we got to seal the timing cover up with silicone. I do not like doing that. Thanks, Ford. But the valve covers actually have gaskets on them, and they have seals that go around these tubes for the spark plugs, and they're being a little difficult to get in. As you see, I got a Felpro kit here from O'Reilly's, and these do not exactly fit down in the bore perfect. So they're getting a little oblong on me, so those are being difficult right now. You know, kind of a little design flaw with the valve cover. I mean, come on, you could have just put the seal up a little higher, Ford. I mean, come on now. Once I got done crying about how bad this car is designed, we are ready to go ahead and put the motor back in the car, get everything hooked up, and get this thing ready to start. Now, sticking the motor in is not that bad. It's basically the reversal of the removal procedure, and with the Harbor Freight table car and the lift, it makes it a much easier job. Once we got everything bolted up, get the suspension and the subframe back underneath of it, get this thing back on the ground and fill it up with fluids, we will be ready to start it up and see how it sounds and talk about a nerve-wracking experience. When you're doing a job like a timing chain, going to start it up for the first time is the most nerve-wracking part because you got to make sure the engine is in time, and if it's not in time, you could do serious damage to the engine that'll prevent it from ever running again. We breathe a sigh of relief as the engine starts up and sounds pretty normal, but it is short-lived as the engine is running pretty rough. And at first I'm not sure exactly what it is, but the more I listen to it, the more I realize that we just have a misfire on the engine. And with the scan tool, we are able to confirm that we just had a bad ignition coil. I'm not sure what caused this ignition coil to go bad while we were removing the motor and doing all this work, but who knows. We get another ignition coil up here, and now this thing's running smooth as butter. But running smooth is just half the battle. We got to make sure this thing stays running smooth and doesn't go over temperature. And that's one of the things we have not been able to test on this motor is the integrity of the head gaskets and the ability of the motor to be able to keep itself cool, which we're going to find out rather quickly as we let this motor run for longer than 5 to 10 minutes. All right, so here we are. This thing is, it's running, it's holding temperature. It's got clean oil in it, got clean antifreeze in it. Finally got a good water pump in it. It seems to be timed correctly, so we did a good job with that. We got all the fluids put back in it, so we're essentially ready to test drive this thing now. And it's got me a little nervous because I want to make sure that, you know, I have no idea how this vehicle drives because I wasn't able to drive it because it had so much antifreeze and water inside the motor. So let's go ahead and drive this thing and make sure it's a good car. As we drive this thing down the road, it all but confirms that we've actually fixed this car for less than $300 and did it rather quickly. We only worked on this thing for a matter of a couple days and were able to clean this entire motor out, put a new water pump and timing chain on it, and get it back in driving and working order where it can provide some reliable transportation for a lucky individual in the future. Throughout this project, I did have my doubts on whether I was actually going to be able to get it fixed or not, but here we are driving it down the road. And here you are still watching me and still having faith in me. And let's be honest, you never had a doubt. And for that, I thank you. And if you want to follow any more of my projects, because I have plenty more of them to do, you can subscribe to this channel here and I will continue posting and busting my knuckles just for you. You can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook where I post weekly content about the day-to-day things that I do. If you need help with your own cars or have any mechanic questions, feel free to subscribe to my Patreon where I offer one-on-one help with other people. You can also email me at justcallme81@gmail.com and I'll answer any questions you have when I get a little bit of time. Thanks for watching, and whatever you do, however you do it, make sure you work hard, make sure you play hard, and most importantly, make sure you stay dirty. You can just call me Eddie.